Martin, what did you make of what Rishi Sunak had to say today? He's trying to make him look like a future prime minister. I mean, the overall performance first. What did you make of it?
It was better than I expected. It was worse than I wanted.
Is that okay? That's which bits impressed you?
So look, in normal times, I would be very happy to have seen what was the sensible move of raising the national insurance threshold to equalise it with income tax. I mean, that is the major gain for people from this spring statement. I'm not sure. Do you want me to? I can explain how it works if you like.
Yes, please. An increase of £3,000 before you start paying national insurance, equalising it with income tax. Yes, and you say that's a gain worth having for us.
Yeah. So look. If you now don't pay income tax until £12,600 odd quid a year, that's a £3,000 of earnings you don't pay income tax on, which has a net gain of around 360 quid. Mm-hmm. So that's 360 quid net gain to everybody, but of that in isolation. Of course, at the same time, and pre-announced, so this wasn't new today, we know there is a 1.25 percentage point rise in the rate of national insurance, which means you will pay around 10% more national insurance. Now, when you bring those two together, although the rise starts on the 6th of April, whereas the threshold changes in July. But when you bring the two together in July, what it means is, if you earn under roughly £35,000, then from July, including both, you will pay less national insurance than you do now, with a maximum gain of around 360 quid.
Yep.
If you earn £35,000 or more, you will pay in total more national insurance, because the 1.25 percentage point increase outbalances the change to the threshold at the bottom end.
So in that case, he's right in saying, Rishi Sunak, in response to Rachel Reeves, that we have targeted this in such a way that the people who do need a break are going to get it lower down the income scale.
On the national insurance move, that is progressive. Absolutely correct. If you're going to put national insurance up, it's the people on the higher end who are going to pay more because of it, because of changing the thresholds. This was something I was predicting on the telly a couple of days ago, but I need to be honest, he's moved it by more than I thought he would. I thought he'd increase that threshold by £1,000. He's increased that threshold by £3,000. So that is a big change, and that will help. But for most people, I'm afraid it is still peanuts compared to the cost of living crisis. I was disappointed with what he did on energy bills, which was very little. Giving a VAT reduction on energy efficiency measures is a perfectly decent thing to do in the medium term, but has no impact on the current crisis that we're facing, with a 54% increase coming on the 1st of April, and likely another 25% increase coming next October, which adds £1,300 a year to a typical energy bill.
Yeah.
So, you know, the £500 million for the Household Support Fund, that again is useful. Local councils are desperate for the money. That's emergency support on food and energy in the winter for people in absolute crisis. 500 million is decent, but it's not that much, and it only touches people at the very bottom. There are many people on lower to middle earnings who are really, really struggling at the moment. So I would have liked to see more. You've got the fuel duty cut. It's £1 on a tank of petrol, ceteris paribus, as the economists call it. Everything else remaining equal. But of course, it isn't remaining equal because fuel's going up so much. So the national insurance is the big one. I mean, the energy bills, the problem is everything you look at has to be scaled against £1,300 year on year increase in energy bills. So national insurance maximum gain of £300 doesn't go that far. You can add in the £150 council tax rebate for band A to D that's happening on the 1st of April. And if you wanted to count it of cash, the £200 loan not low scheme happening in October. So we add all that up together, and the maximum you've got there is £650, and there's a £1,300 household rise coming, and energy bills are regressive. What do I mean by that? The very richest don't pay that much more for energy than the very poorest. It's a bit more like a poll tax. Everybody has a flat amount. So it's still going to be a very, very difficult year for people.
Let me talk to you about this potential windfall tax on oil companies. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. It certainly hasn't been announced this time. You are always very strong on energy companies. I think you've been talking about how the direct debits that people pay are way too much, which means that they get to hold your money and then you have to get it back and work it off, which means they get the benefit of having your money when you should. I mean, you're always very strong on that. What are you saying to energy companies now? What can you say to us? How can we approach energy companies and get our value for money?
It's really interesting when I hear people talk about energy companies, because in the mind, when we talk about energy, we are thinking of the company that we pay our energy bills to. And I get lots of messages on social media, people saying they're making outrageous profits, it's awful, what's going on? Actually, it's more complicated than that. The final stage of getting energy to us is not profitable at the moment. That's why so many companies have gone bust.
There's no market.
Right. It's the producers of energy and those higher up the chain of getting energy, which in some cases they're the same firm, like the giant Centrica, they are a big vertical integration. So they go from the top to the bottom. So their final arm won't be making that much money. Their other arms is. And so if you're going to do a windfall taxes, you're actually much higher up the chain. It's your Shells and your BPs. It's not your energy retailer who you're talking the windfall profits on. I mean, the energy market is in a horrendous state. It's broken. There's no competition. There's nowhere to switch to. No one. There's no decent tariffs on comparison sites. They're all far too expensive. The only chance you've got of getting a decent fix at the moment is if you happen to flukily get there in the time that your existing company offers you a decent deal. And most people have reduced their usage as much as they can. We are getting to the point where people are heating the human, not heating the home, which I think is going to be the next big trend, I'm afraid. And people are putting insulation in if they can afford it or not. A 5% VAT cut on household insulation isn't going to help people who can't afford household insulation. So there is not much to do in the energy market apart from use as little as you possibly can if you're struggling. There is no marketplace. There is no social tariff. The price cap has been protective to an extent, mainly because of a time lag. So you ask me what I tell people to do in the energy market. I'm out of tools on that one, which is why I wanted the Chancellor to help. That's why I sent a challenge to him this morning saying this is your opportunity. You and only you have the tools to be able to help people.
Well, I was going to ask you, because he's on with Ian Dale later on here on LBC, I was going to ask him if you were to ask him a question directly, and I'm very, very sure he knows exactly who you are. Ask him that question, Martin. What would it be right now, having actually heard the statement rather than sort of anticipating it? You've heard it. What do you want to ask him? Or tell him?
I would say to him, Chancellor, we are still standing on a precipice of personal finance, and you are the only person with the tools to be able to help that. There is likely to be, on top of the 54% rise in energy bills in April, another at least 25% rise in energy bills in October, which would take the total increase to £1,300 year on year, though it may be more. The measures that you have put in place do not come close to covering that amount. Are you prepared to do more if October happens as predicted? Can we expect to see more help coming on energy bills? Because if not, there will be people still having to make a choice between starving or freezing.
Martin, that's very good. Thank you very much indeed for that. As I say, the Chancellor on with Ian Dale later on from 7 o'clock here on LBC. There's really, you've been somebody over the years who has championed just getting the most out of getting the most bang for your buck, trying to find a way through things. This is a set of circumstances, and this may well be the response from the Chancellor. We just don't know what's going to come next. I mean, he does have a point that these circumstances have rarely been seen before, both COVID and all the support, plus the invasion of Ukraine. This is something that really, it has to be acknowledged, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, it has to be acknowledged. I don't think a Chancellor's ever come into the hot seat more than this one. I mean, there have been a series of crises to be navigated. Within COVID, he did reasonably well. There were many people who were excluded from help, but the furlough support did what the economy needed. It kept money flowing. It kept the economy going. It built up a lot of debt, which is what he's now struggling with. I don't think he expected to be then thrown into this cost of living crisis on the back. They thought the last few years of this government were going to be ones where they could recover from COVID and it would all work well. Unfortunately, we're into another crisis. And in terms of personal finances, I would say this one is worse. partly because of the COVID help the Chancellor put in place. But in the 20 years I've been doing the job as money-saving expert, I know I don't look old enough, Andrew, thank you.
Well, yeah, okay, you say.
But in the 20 years or more, actually, I've been doing it, this is worse than the financial crash of 2007. This is worse than COVID for people's pockets. This is the big one. And it is a real challenge. And my issue, I slightly worry that the Chancellor is more interested in obeying his golden rules than he is in trying to rescue the people who are struggling the most.